A surprising number of board games have a very common theme, being colonialism. They frequently ask the question of what if you and your friends discovered a new land filled with untouched resources, unless you ignore the people who are originally living there, and things that are ripe for the taking, specifically from the people who originally were living there until you turned around, probably with guns. But hear me out. What if colonialism was bad? Well, that's what this board game is all about. It's about what if an island filled with untouched resources was discovered and that was bad. Spirit Island is a game for you and up to 3 other players in which you take control of various spirits across the land, all in the hope to eventually deter the invading colonists who have come to your land and are spreading their horrific blight. And guess what? Everyone goes first. It is a cooperative game, not unlike Pandemic, but the particular disease that you'll be trying to stamp out in this game, well, it's the horrible, disgusting disease that is colonialism. Have I mentioned that enough yet? Each turn, you and your spirit friends will use various abilities and powers to push, kill, and maim the various settlers before, hopefully, they get too out of hand. And honestly, it's genuinely a really fun and wonderful cooperative experience. Your day-to-day life as a spirit mainly revolves around using your powers. These cards, and these come in various shapes and sizes, as well as deadliness and how much they cost. But the main thing you need to look out for is whether or not these cards have a bird of fastness or a turtle of slowness on them. You see, this is important because in the middle of your go, after the fast actions, the settlers get to ransack, build, and move into the lands depending on, according to the various land cards that there are. Meaning that you might go in thinking, hey, I've got this problem perfectly under control, it's great. And then you realize that you've actually it's a slow action, and that the problem that you're trying to fix has actually become much, much worse and can no longer be fixed. It is this delightfully little puzzle that makes Spirit Island into the wonderful slog it can be. Because you see, all of your fast actions, they tend to be things that, well, mainly just move units around. You push and pull them all over the place. While your slow actions are the ones that actually, remove things off of the board. So what this often means is that you'll see what's coming up at the start of a turn and then realize you've not planned ahead in the slightest, because there is nothing you can do with your fast actions that will stop these settlers from building and then producing a lot of blight. Oh no! But as you play the game more, and with each turn, your spirits will get stronger, because you see, at the start of each turn, you get to do a grow action, and this might actually involve removing one of your little discs from your board, which reveals that you can now do more things. You get more energy each turn, or you can play more and more cards each turn, and this will all probably be quite useful in defeating colonialism. Each spirit is surprisingly unique and adds an incredible amount of flair to the game, and they will have wonderfully poetic names like River Surges in Sunlight or Bringers of Dreams and Nightmares. Fun! You'll probably begin to form your own, unique nicknames for each spirit around the table, because trying to remember some of them is not going to happen. But also, each spirit, when I say unique, I mean everything is unique about them, from their starting cards to how they grow. And it adds so much to the game, you see. Spicy Pigeon here needs most of their presence to be in, stacks of 2 in order for a lot of their abilities to work, which I only recently realized is like lightning rods. Or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who spreads so slowly across the board, like with a range of 0 or 1 for the most part, but provides incredible defensive spells throughout the entire thing, like a rock would do. Or there is my favourite spirit, Ocean's Undying Grass. This spirit's growth cycle is so interesting and fun because it involves like pushing your presence out of the ocean into land, spreading out, and then whenever you want to like reclaim your cards to get stronger again, you end up having to retract back into the ocean again, like the tide in the ocean, like waves lapping up on a beach. So it becomes this incredibly interesting puzzle where you're trying to like preempt where you need to spread out to use your powers, but also rapidly realizing that, well, that's gonna blight, that's bad, and then having to retract just in time to hopefully not die all the time. And I love it. It is one of the most interesting puzzles in like this sort of board game I could possibly think of, and I am obsessed with it. You'll all eventually settle into the groove of spirits and murder, and eventually maybe you want to step things up a little notch. Maybe you don't want to just fight the general concept of colonialism. Maybe you want to fight a specific country's concept of colonialism, each with their own unique rules and progressively bigger and stronger difficulty settings, which had so many extra rules and bits and pieces. And these are the game, and my goodness is it wonderful. Your friends will sit down at the start of your gaming session and be like, hoo, should we fight Sweden today? And then, you'll all decide with trepidation as to which extra rule to add. Maybe you go for level 4, which, sure, it's just a small, minor additional rule that possibly involves putting down an extra town during startup, but that, with all the other rules, adds so many extra layers to the game, just by virtue of a different setup. And my goodness, it makes the game fun and difficult. The thing is though, as you work up the various difficulties of these countries, there might come a moment where, well, you don't actually win. You face off against England level 3 and just the extra builds, the extra cities, the extra towns. It all, well, becomes too much, and they spread blight across an entire land to make a new blight land because, well, they missed the one they left back home. And I don't know, maybe you just have to come to terms with the fact that this is your skill limit. This is just where you can get up to. Or maybe you'll come back with a vengeance as you begin to learn more and more about each spirit and learn more and more about the game, as you begin to focus more on the individual elements on each card and how that applies to your spirits and their innate powers, and you get better and better at the game and take on tougher and tougher challenges until eventually you start looking at all the level 6 ones, which are so difficult. And maybe you overcome them because you're learning the game and progressing with each spirit, learning more and more of them and the ins and outs of everything. And my goodness, it's really good. Sadly, the more interesting spirits are, well, few and far between. You see, you will very rapidly begin to just kind of rely on the same spirits each game. Spicy Pigeon over here, the ocean. And that's because they're like innate powers they have on the board, where you get a lot of elements to then use them each turn, are useful and strong. And as well as all their various, the theming and everything about them, is beautiful and works well. Plus, you have like the advanced spirits, which are ones who tend to have like elements which you reveal along their growth cycle, like little tracks, and they always almost tend to be the most interesting spirits in the game, because they've got that extra added interesting plot to them as to when to unreveal things. And sadly, spirits like river surges in sunlight, well, their abilities just tend to be making the locals, the Daham, get it on. What I routinely find myself wanting is more spirits that are really interesting, like the ocean or a spread of rampant green, whose powers and unique mechanics are like really fun and interesting without necessarily being super gimmicky like the nightmares are. And additionally, you've got these massive decks of minor and major powers, and yet some of them are really useful that you'll probably be wanting to use all the time. Others aren't that useful, and you begin to have to ask yourself, well, why would I ever not want to make a tsunami? I'm sure they're useful at some point, but lightning talons, ripping the ground asunder. Also, let's talk about visuals. You see, Spirit Island does an impressive job at having a visual clarity across the board, because you see, each land is uniquely coloured and quite diversely textured as well. The invaders are all made out of plastic, whilst the natives and your pieces are all made out of wood, which means that you can check where the danger is at just a cursory glance as to where all the big plastic is, or where things are great because it's full of things that you want, like wood or something, But at the same time, these are awful, and also the artwork is kind of hit and miss. Some of the artwork within this game is wonderful to look at and incredibly impressive. Other bits of artwork are, well, kind of lacking in places. And most of the artwork is within, your minor and major powers. The issue is that these are the representations of your magical spiritual powers, how you are affecting the world. And you want that visual idea of you ripping the sky asunder or inflicting a horrible plague upon people. So when you look at it, you're like, yeah, that's gross. Meanwhile, other abilities, you look at them and you're like, well, what even is this? Also, it is a cooperative game, which means you can potentially run into the issue of the loud person at the table taking control of the entire game, and everyone else is just an extra pair of hands for them to hold all the cards. Oh no! Thankfully, by virtue of just being, a lot going on at all the times, this isn't as much of an issue in Spirit Island, because there's just so much happening. There's so many powers and so many different abilities and just places where things are happening and like information to digest and keep hold of, that while that player might be like, you need to go over here and do this, and you need to be here and do something else, realistically, that's not going to happen, because you might not have the resources and you're possibly doing something else somewhere over here. And you rapidly just have to accept that, people are going to die. Spirits, we are besieged. We request your aid. Oh, well, I'm actually busy over here, so, Okay, what about you? Oh, no, I have to defend over here, because otherwise it would be really bad. Come on now. I'm out of cards. I can't actually do anything this turn, so I'm taking the turn out. Finally though, I think the biggest issue with Spirit Island is quite simply how the game ends, which is potentially quite bad. You see, once you've built up enough fear to scare everyone away, or smashed everything off the board, or simply just survived long enough that I guess they give up or something. They all go home. It's a silly place. The game ends, and rarely with a bang. Instead, what it mostly ends with is at least one player around the board looking up from their cards and simply saying, I can win the game. Or alternatively, everyone around the board begins to finally get the feeling that they can probably win the game, and so collectively sit and work out the exact numbers and maths involved to win the game that go. That's not fun. You're not necessarily winning the game with this big rush. You're sat down doing an equation to finish the game. Like, the feelings you have afterwards aren't that of happiness. It's normally exhaustion after a tired slog, or you know, the emotion that is mathematics. What I'm saying is that when you finish the game, you never are like sat around cheering, high-fiving, and doing what I assume friends do with one another when something good has happened. Instead, you'll mostly be sat around the board being mentally drained. You'll all sigh with relief at like, finally, we finished it. Because the game doesn't really have these great cathartic moments, or at least it doesn't end with that cathartic moment of like clearing the board and then bam, the game ends. You may have had that turn earlier, you know, where you played big cards and spent so much energy to just like clean the board up, taking off hundreds of units, racking up fear, getting fear card after fear card after fear card in a way that hasn't necessarily won you the game yet, but brought you a lot closer to it. And that's an incredible moment. Everyone's thrilled when that happens. But then you've got like two or three more turns realistically where you're just sort of then chasing the enemy around trying to clear up the last bits, but they keep being slightly annoying and rebuilding bits, and it never has a big bang of an ending. It slowly peters out after a big bang, and the ending is just the cold embers of a firework remnant. Rarely have I ever had a game where, you know, everything just happened to work out in that last turn. Victory came upon us somewhat unexpectedly, where, you know, communication may not have been super great and we're all like, oh man, everything's getting out of hand, but we can just do this last ditch effort to wipe the board down, and the cards from the fear deck are in our favor, and things just happen to go well, and oh my god, we've done it, we've won, and everyone's happy and jubilations are abound. Instead, it's mostly just everyone around the table claiming that they can win the game, and then everyone just packs up the game and goes home, which is a bit sad. With all of that said though, Spirit Island continues to be an incredible cooperative game. If you have found yourself, you know, burnt out on Pandemic and are maybe looking for something a little meatier, Spirit Island's a great game. Not to mention that, like Pandemic, Spirit Island is this incredible entry level game, thanks to the different difficulties and by virtue of being a cooperative game. Because sure, you can bring someone along, let them explore the like cute little spirits and, you know, all the different abilities that you get to use, and they can slowly work their way around this new game, this entry, you know, a board game, novel, whilst not necessarily being completely overwhelmed by too many difficult rules, depending on how deep you want to go in. And you, the more experienced player, can just, you know, clean up around all the messes that they're leaving behind, and they get area to just happily exist and come into the hobby. Mwah. People online think that this game is played best at 2 players, which I don't agree with in any way, shape or form. No. You see, the issue with 2 players is that, well, the number of pieces stay the exact same. So the board is smaller and there's a lot less ground for you to cover. So each player can quite easily just cover the entire board, right? Like, sure, you're all doing fewer actions on the whole because you're missing a player to do stuff, but you can always cover every space, essentially. In 3 to 4 players, the board is bigger and there's more ground to cover, and it becomes almost impossible for every single player to cover every single zone. So the game is scrappier and looser, and it's funnier as well because you have more of those moments where, like, this part of the board, there's no way I can ever hope to reach that. I don't ever have to worry about it in real terms. That's like the other players to deal with. But at the same time, I'll be like, anyone want to help over here? And they're like, well, no, it's on the other side of the map. I can't do anything. 3 and 4 players, it makes the game a bit longer and harder. But I think that's where the game thrives, is not necessarily having complete control over everything, and instead having to more react to actual limitations. Oh, Spirit Island is a wonderful staple of a cooperative game for people's collections. Like, its variable setups and different rules and all the bits and pieces make it a wonderful game to get people who haven't really played much of the hobby into board games. It's one you can drag people along, kicking and screaming. It's a cooperative game. They have no choice to play. You are playing with them. But at the same time, there's enough to get waist deep into the hard-hitting rules of difficult countries and let the game just kick you in your spirit shins for an entire evening. And that's great. Hi there. I just realized I needed to do an outro as well, and I was about to pack up. So, thank you for watching this video. It's about Spirit Island. It's a board game that actually I've not played in a while, but I really like. Honestly, we've played so much of this that, like, a number of the tokens have, like, worn away from the amount of, like, rubbing we do as we're mulling our moves over. It's great. Genuinely, I can't chef's kiss enough, which I keep doing, about how great this game is. But if you have thoughts about Spirit Island, why don't you let me know? If you've got other really cool, fun cooperative games that are like Spirit Island, or you think are better than Spirit Island, why don't you give that a go as well and let me know? I make videos. Why don't you subscribe? By specifically, firstly, if you want more videos that is about board games, one about Mechs vs Minions, which is also a great cooperative game and a great, like, entry point game because, again, it's cooperative and it's kind of simple to understand. Check out that video. I made it a while ago. Or there's another one here, which is a board game about Scythe, a board game. It's not cooperative. I wouldn't recommend it as an entry game. It's notably bigger and meatier and made out of robots. Check that out. Otherwise, you can click on my face to subscribe. Thank you and goodbye.